Hey guys, Kelade here. Let's talk about Arms Warriors because right now they're definitely talk of the town. They're doing crazy amounts of damage in a dungeon setting. Definitely way more than Fury can put out, especially with the AoE burst. Right, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we mentioned in our Arms vs Fury video, the Arms anger management allows them to have, way reduced cooldown on both their Warbreaker and Bladestorm. They're able to use that combo as much as they can. Basically, I found every other pack, if you're pulling like big packs, every other pack you have the full combo, and then every pack I had Warbreaker, so it definitely is pretty crazy like burst AoE, but the burst AoE is so consistent that it's almost kind of consistent AoE in that sense. The other thing is that, of course, their azerite traits for AoE is pretty good. The Lord of War azerite traits, right? Just one trait at eye level 325 gives me Warbreaker deals an additional 4,415 damage and generates 10 rage. If I had 3 of these traits, that's going to be around 13,000 damage from the eye level 325 gear. And that AoEs, right? And that's on top of the damage that your Warbreaker already does. So you're looking at an insane amount of burst from one ability, right? That's something that Fury doesn't have anymore. Fury doesn't have that, hey, let me burst something really, really quickly. Arms does. You press that ability and you just go to town and everything. So really crazy burst coming out of the Arms Warriors. Just be aware that the burst is so crazy that I've often pulled aggro. I would say like 70% of the dungeons I run, the threat has been off the charts for Arms. Like literally every single dungeon you're doing is basically skittish. So be wary of that. Now the other thing I want to go over is just really quickly kind of the talent setup and kind of what I've been running in the dungeons. I've been going with War Machine, Double Time, For a Battle, Banning Stride, Warbreaker, In for the Kill, and Anger Management. These I found are pretty good for dungeoning, right? War Machine, of course, things are going to be dying, so you're going to want that. Double Time, just more charge, more rage generation, great. For a Battle, for those, few times when you actually don't have enough cooldown reduction from using your abilities that you actually have to use Whirlwind, and then Banning Stride for more mobility, Warbreaker of course, setting up that crazy AoE so everything gets debuffed with your Colossus Smash, and then In for the Kill. I actually prefer In for the Kill over Avatar. Now technically Avatar could burst harder because you just hit it before you hit Warbreaker and then you hit Bladestorm, but I like In for the Kill because right now my gear isn't too great. And the increased haste that I get is actually really, really nice. Because if you play Avatar right now with this current build, you're going to feel really, really slow in comparison, right? Like, you can try out the 2 different talents. You'll see a huge difference after you use Warbreaker if you don't take In for the Kill. Anger Management, of course, this is what's making us be able to use as many cooldowns as much as we can. If you're going for a single target, what you can change, right, you can go Skull Splitter, and then you can go Massacre, right? This is basically the single target setup instead. But of course, since we're basically just doing dungeons for the first 3 weeks, I will go with the dungeon setup. And then as far as for gear is actually not that much different than the Fury gear that we talked about. Getiiku, Cut Out Death, right? The weapon, the bleed weapon from King's Rest, still best in slot for Arms too. The 2 trinkets we talked about, the Resonance Gleaming Eye, and the other one, the Briny Barnacle, those 2 trinkets are still the biz for Arms too. So that's very similar. The only thing, of course, is the azerite traits is going to be different, right? Because they're obviously going to have different azerite traits. We talked about Lord of War being really good for AoE. Another one that's pretty okay for AoE is this one right here, Seismic Wave. Basically, it makes your overpower do like an AoE wave towards the enemies. It's more consistent damage, but I feel like the burst is going to be better here, so I definitely prefer Lord of War over that. As far as for single target, the best one is going to be Test of Might. When Warbreaker expires, your strength is increased by 40 for every 10 rage you spent during Warbreaker. This essentially makes your Warbreaker into kind of like a pumping up and powering up phase, right? With this build, if you're putting up a few Test of Mights, sometimes you might actually want to use Warbreaker and then you want to just spend your rage with AoEs, either Mortal Strike that are cleave with Sweeping Strikes, or you just want to hit that Whirlwind, right? Spend as much rage as you can, and then once you get that buff, that strength buff, and your Colossus Smash ends, then you can use Bladestorm. It basically gives you a longer burst, so if that's what you're looking for, you're totally okay to go that way. But if you wanted like a really short burst, that just ends within like 10 seconds, then you can definitely just go Colossus Smash or Warbreaker and Bladestorm. That definitely works too. The other thing we want to look at is, of course, stat weights, right? For the rest of your gear, how are you going to gear like all the other pieces, right? So stat weights is a huge problem for Arms Warriors right now because it doesn't fit into what Blizzard said they wanted all stats and gearing to be in BFA. Right, Blizzard has kind of the idea that in BFA they want to make gearing simpler. They want it to be the instance that get a gear that's like 10 or 15 eye levels higher, it should be an upgrade for you, regardless of what the stats on there are. That's not the case right now for Arms, right? If we look at the stat weights right now, my crit, right, these are like scale stat weights, right? My crit is worth 1.16. Haste is worth 1.05, so relatively close, but crit is slightly higher right now. Versatility is 0.94, you know, slightly below haste, but it's still up there. Mastery is at a whopping 0.15. It's nowhere close to the other 3 traits. Basically, if a piece of gear has mastery on it for arms right now, you throw it in the trash. Like, that's how gearing is for arms warriors. There was a moment before I got more gear where my rings and my other gear that I had from Legion were better than BFA gear, just because the BFA gear had mastery on it. So this is a huge problem, and luckily we did get some kind of like resolution around this. Now Blizzard today, they did put out this post where, you know, arms tuning coming very soon, where they talked about, you know, the arms mastery, about how it's really not working out right now and how they want to change it. I do want to focus really quickly on this because they kind of talk about just the damage that the mastery does and how that's being put in place, and I personally really don't think it's the damage that's the issue. Just to give you guys some perspective on how the arms mastery works, right? The arms mastery, like, let's read it really quickly. Deep wound damage is increased by whatever percent, dealing whatever bleed damage over 6 seconds, right? The way you activate your mastery is striking enemy with mortal strike, execute, or blaze storm inflicts deep wounds. Now, of course, you can always talent into cleave, and then that will also inflict deep wounds too. But, you know, regardless of that side, right, that's how you activate your mastery. You just hit them with one of your big abilities. Problem is, right now the mastery lasts 6 seconds, right? If I hit an execute and I hit another execute right afterwards, like 2 executes, it doesn't add up the damage. The second time that I press that execute, it will put the mastery debuff up again. The first one gets overridden and it's completely gone. That damage is not carried over, it's not saved, there's no secondary stacks, right? That damage is wasted. That's the huge problem with mastery right now for Arms Warrior, is that we're not hitting, you know, Mortal Strike, Execute, or Blaze Storm every 6 seconds. Especially not in Execute phase, right? So this is really why, one of the reasons why mastery is so bad. And also, of course, they do give you a pretty good amount of mastery at the start. So every point isn't as worth it as all of the other stuff is. You know, maybe they could increase the damage amount by a pretty crazy amount, but I really think that they should change something about the duration, because a couple months ago, the duration wasn't 6 seconds. It used to be, it did the full damage within 3 seconds. A much, much shorter window where all of that damage can go out. Even if you're hitting like an execute, you're only wasting like half, right? Because half of that bleed will have already ticked through. Actually, it's probably better than half, because if you have haste, now, right, in BFA, your bleeds will tick faster with higher haste, right? So that actually wasn't going to be a problem. Maybe Blizzard thought that would be too strong, so they made it 6 seconds to force you to waste some of that. But that definitely doesn't feel right. There's not many specs out there that I feel like that have too much of that like wasted DPS. Of course, dot classes in general, when the target dies, technically the dot's wasted, but you're not constantly like wasting it throughout the course of a fight, like an Arms Warrior does, right? If I go into a pack of ads and I Blaze Storm on top of them, every time I Blaze Storm ticks, it's wasting the previous deep wounds basically, right? Like, if Blizzard just made a way for that debuff to either add up the damage or make it do it faster, I feel like that would definitely help it even better without them having to do so much number tuning changes. I think a lot of people are scared that Blizzard will buff Arms Mastery and nerf the rest of the Arms kit too much, but we will have to see. So that's where we're at. So keep an eye out for all the Arm stuff. Obviously, people are like, are you switching to Arms? Are you switching to Arms? Well, we'll have to see, because there's going to be a tuning patch that happens for Arms Warriors before the raid comes out. We'll see where they land, but right now, definitely, Arms Warrior is doing a really crazy amount of damage. If you guys want to try it, definitely try it out. You know, try out the talents that I had for you guys. You know, the gear is relatively similar to Fury. Basically, you just want crit and haste, and you want to avoid mastery. As always, thanks for checking out the video, guys. Feel free to subscribe to see more. See ya!